Hey guys, I'm Clara from Stefanie EU, and I'm here today with Stefanie Brendl, founder and president of Shark Allies. Stefanie is, of course, a very experienced shark diver, but also a very experienced conservationist. And she has basically been at the front of the battle for the shark fin trade ban in the United States. We have been asking you what questions you guys had about diving with sharks in our stories, and we got many questions. But I still get the impression that we have a lot of misconceptions about sharks and they still seem to have a bad reputation. The most frequent question I got was, is it dangerous to dive with sharks, and how dangerous is it? So maybe Stefanie, you could give us a couple of information on that.
Yeah, I get that asked a lot. It is not inherently dangerous. I think it's the human behavior and our lack of awareness that makes it dangerous. You know, it's like many other things. You can walk on the beach, you can interact with dogs and other animals. It's not inherently dangerous. The beach itself is not dangerous. The dogs are not. But it's maybe your approach and how you behave in the situation, how you may not be recognizing the sign. I think shark diving is just like that. Mm-hmm. I think it needs to be looked at as it's a wilderness experience. It's not something you should just one day decide to do. You have to just build up a little bit of knowledge and
be prepared.
Awareness, because the animals deserve it, and they are very aware of us, but it's not always the other way around.
Mm-hmm. I would say it's definitely not as dangerous as people think if you have the right preparation, right?
Yeah, there are a lot of variables. You know, the location, what type of sharks you dive with, why the sharks are there, when you go surfing, when you get boating, when you go swimming, when you go walking on the beach, when you go building sandcastles. You know, there are accidents can happen. You just have to try to be not just in your own headspace, but to look at your surroundings and have some knowledge about it. And then it doesn't have to be dangerous.
Yeah.
In most instances, in all of the times I have ever had moments in the water where it got a little sketchy, is always because of the actions of humans. It was never an unpredictable shark or something that came out of nowhere or aggression. It was the action of people and not watching what was going on in the water. So it's the human element is the most dangerous part of shark diving.
Yeah, definitely. I'm curious, how long have you been diving with sharks, actually?
For as long as I've gone in the ocean. I was in the early 90s.
What would you give as advice for a person who really wants to dive with sharks, but still is very scared?
I would say check off all the items on your list ahead of time. Mm-hmm. I think most importantly, when you're diving with sharks, you are adding another element. So everything that relates to diving, your equipment, your capability, your training, that should be a no-brainer by that time. Mm-hmm. Being in the water with sharks or even on a specific shark dive is not the time to be dealing with your buoyancy or equipment doesn't fit or a camera that doesn't work or even a bad mask that keeps fogging up. Eliminate those elements, make sure you are completely ready to only focus on the animals and in the situation. That's number one. But also thinking about where you dive, the location. You know, if you've never gone shark diving, probably just jumping out into the blue, you know, without any kind of guidance is a really bad idea because you'll get overwhelmed. You should go with someone that can put you in your place and say, stay here, you're safe. I will be handling the sharks, you know, go with someone. And maybe your first shark dive should be in a place where it's not too deep. So you have nothing to worry below and behind you, and you can completely focus on what's in front of you. And then you should know the seasonal conditions. You know, is the water going to be rough? Maybe go when the conditions are ideal, good visibility. Sharks react completely different when there is good visibility versus murky, churned up, you know, really strong currents. All of that changes the behavior. And so pick a good time, pick a good location, and then know what species you're going to dive with. And you should know something about the sharks. You should know what they eat, how they behave. Do they show up in groups usually? and be a little bit familiar, watch some films, talk to people that have gone diving with sharks, what the behavior of sharks is like, and if you can't read the behavior, keep your distance. And only when you feel that the animals are comfortable, you can go closer. It should be a no-brainer to not corner a shark on a reef. Maybe have a camera or have something in your hands that if the shark does come too close, you can have it in front of you. All of these are just preparations. And then you should also have an exit plan. I'm going to go to shallower reef, or I'm going to go to the boat. And there might be people in the water that are completely fine. Everything is tranquil and beautiful. And then one person jumps in, makes a lot of splashing noises, is very nervous, jerks around, chases after the sharks. And the dynamic can switch in a moment. Have that agreement with your buddy saying, hey, if you start to feel uncomfortable, let's get real close to each other, If you do all that, the chances of you having an unexpected, dangerous situation are very, very slim. But there's other dangers you need to worry about than the sharks. Just be ready to be a member of the ocean,
not the situation.
Of the land. In that moment.
So we also got a lot of questions of people that were concerned with the sharks. How could someone choose a diving school that's also ethical, and to make sure that it's not abusing the animals or doing anything that's bad for their health?
It's a lot about what you do in the water, not necessarily the operator. It's just being respectful like you would with any other animal, with any other person. And to maybe even tell someone else, hey, knock it off. Don't try to touch the nurse shark. Don't try to be taking a selfie by hanging on to sharks. It's common sense, things like that. In most locations, there are well-known operators that have been around, that have a good reputation, and ask people that really, really like sharks that what the recommendations they have in that location. Ask the right person that you think would be ethical, and they'll probably tell you.
Yeah. Okay, great. That's great. So much good information. You probably weren't always a shark advocate for your entire life, right? So that happened at some point. When did you decide that you wanted to not just dive with sharks, but also protect them?
I've always loved animals growing up, and I always wanted to work in that field somehow, protecting animals, saving them, Yeah, sharks were not on my radar, not because I didn't like them. I just didn't know too much about them. When I first started diving, the whole new world opens up, and you realize there's not just, small fish and corals. There's all these big animals around that have a real presence. Most divers, the big charismatic animals, you feel a little bit of a different connection. My conservation work started to become more dominant when I started a shark diving operation in a tour company in Hawaii. And I found myself talking to people about sharks every single day. And I started to realize, reading every book, watching every film, educating myself more and more, that there was a lot more to sharks in terms of, the crisis that we're facing with them. The support for shark conservation is a lot smaller than for the other animals. Funding is a lot less. They're kind of the underdog. And I connected to that. I started Shark Allies in Hawaii as a nonprofit side of my business. I didn't really mean for it to become a big advocacy group. And then I got involved into the first fin ban in Hawaii without really knowing much about it. Ended up getting completely involved and being there every day and working the bill on every level and learning about the bill process of creating a fin ban, basically just from scratch. Finning, the act of finning, or it was fisheries regulation. If there is a product that is damaging, animal populations, why not deal with the product and deal with it on a trade level? Because if you can't sell it, buy it, or have it, just like other contraband, then you don't have to worry about the poaching as much and the fishing. And that was very clever, and it was a very simple bill. And I learned through that of what the difference is between writing something very effective, writing something that will actually work and not just be symbolic. And it was an amazing experience. We did not think it would make it, but it just picked up steam. And suddenly it succeeded and we had a fin ban. And I thought that's all I was ever going to do on that end. And that was, of course, not the case. That the Hawaii bill became a good template, and one after another just went click, click, click. And we started the sort of this push off in California. And then a lot of the bigger groups came in. And in some of the other states, I just helped from afar, consulting a little bit on maybe the language or maybe on how to, gather up support. And the next big one I took on was Florida. So when you get a series of state bans, then a federal bill is a lot easier to overcome.
Yeah.
It took 2 years and involvement of lots of people and partners. So it always takes a lot of people to do these things. And
for sure.
So I would never say I did it.
Of course, yeah. I mean, right now we need 1 million people supporting us to get it done. So of course, but I think this really shows us the power of a success story. So the Hawaii fin ban led up to so many things, and now here in 2021 we are almost achieving a US fin ban, a national bill.
Canada passed it, and I think that the more dominoes fall, each domino gets a little easier. Of course, EU, that's going to be very hard again, because it's a whole nother it's another level, something about just building momentum. And that's why sometimes when people will say, oh, it's never going to happen, or this is not going to make a difference, you just still do it. If you can do it, because you don't know how it will add up. If we would have said, well, what difference is a Hawaii bill going to make, then none of this would have potentially happened. Yeah, you do what you can in your own backyard first, clean up your own backyard, and stop looking only at Asia, saying, oh, the bad guys. We're pretty bad in the EU, and we're pretty bad in the US. Definitely. So let's clean that up before we point fingers too much, and then come at it from a positive point of view, saying, let's change the world. Let's go this next step, and let's make it something positive. All we can do is keep going. And the EU ban would be really big.
I think it would have an effect in the entire market that we can't even measure right now.
People assume that the numbers are linear, and we're only talking about fin trade. There is a huge amount that I think of bycatch that would be reduced if there wasn't the incentive to keep the sharks for fins. So I think that number would go down, because fishermen know how to avoid sharks if they want to. It's not just about the trade of fins. I think it's taken away the incentive for the byproducts, and saying, justifying squalene, justifying the shark meat. Every product that comes from shark gets justified because, well, it's just bycatch. And why is that bycatch there? Because the fins are worth so much money.
I guess it also shows how much the law that already exists today has many loopholes and has many failures. Because, for example, we have already some CITES protected shark species, but they still keep ending up in the market. And we've seen with that banning finning is not enough.
Well, I mean, banning finning, how is that supposed to be enforced? They tried fins attached, and then people started cheating by taking meat sharks, cutting their fins off, and then using the valuable fins from other sharks that they didn't want the meat, and then stitching those fins onto sharks. So then fins attached had to go through another round to say fins naturally attached. And then they had to go into the details of like how much skin needs to be shown, because fishermen wanted to be able to cut the fins partially to wrap them around the body. So they had to let that go. It's just ridiculous, and that's the only reason why it had to go all the way to banning the fins. And when I first started the Hawaii bill, I didn't start it, but when I first got, on it with Senator He, everyone was telling me, the most conservation groups were telling me, oh, it's never going to happen. We don't know why you're even trying. And it's definitely not in a place like Hawaii, where there's so many Chinese businessmen, that people don't want to take on a challenge and say, it's not going to succeed, therefore I don't want to be part. One more person, one more group might make the difference. And that's our job. We're supposed to be taking on things that are hard, not easy. I can go out and start another adopt a shark program or something like that. And that would be easy. I could do some beach cleanups. Those would be easy. But taking on legislation and actually fighting the fin trade, that's hard. But that's what we should do for sharks.